Ladies, gentlemen, and tarnished of all ages, Shadow of the Erdtree is a difficult piece of DLC, and if you go into it into the same mindset that you originally hit the base game with, you will probably get pummeled by the harder enemies and bosses. That's just the way it is. But what if I told you there were a number of new ways in the DLC to boost the damage output of all builds? And no, I'm not talking about scadutree blessings, we all know that already. I'm talking about new equipment or items that have been put into the game that you can use to power yourself up, regardless if you're using a massive strength weapon, a tiny dex weapon, or magic of any kind, or anything in between all of those. To the point that with everything put together, you'll have nearly 160% higher damage than you would without any of these things active, which of course is absolutely freaking nuts. With that said, let's dive into the whole thing in order of effectiveness. First things first, I feel like I need to mention the brand new consumable version of a previously available buff, Golden Vow. In Shadow of the Erdtree, you can find these as a tool that is consumed on use, and there is even a cookbook to let you actually craft these repeatedly, which is located here in the Messmer soldier camp directly south of the Shadow Keep in Shadow Altus, in the back left side of the camp if you are coming from the main road, just inside of this tent over here. This is notable because normally Golden Vow is an actual incantation, requires 25 faith, and that version of this buff is a 15% increase to all damage done and a 10% increase to your damage negation stats that lasts for 80 seconds after you cast it. There is also an Ash of War that you can put on something as small as a dagger or fist weapons for minimal weight issues, but it is also a weaker version of this buff, giving you 11.5% damage increase and 7.5% damage negation increase for only 45 seconds. The tool then, the consumable, you would probably assume is just a version of one of these two things that is made into an actual consumable item, but that's actually wrong. It is weirdly its own thing that exists in between the two of them, being specifically a 12.75% damage increase and around an 8% damage negation increase, but matching the 45-second timer of the Ash of War. So if you are running 25 faith, you may as well still use the incantation. It is still the best version of this that exists, but if you don't have that kind of faith in your build, the consumable is technically better than the Ash of War option. It just has, a farming requirement to have a lot of it. That said, the Arena PvP game mode in this game refunds any consumables that you use inside of it, so it is actually specifically a very good option for that exact situation. On the note of consumables returning in the arena and being given back to you, there is one other new consumable that is a little bit odd until you consider that fact, which is Dragonscale Flesh. This item is a consumable tool, but there is only one of them in the entire game, so you can only eat this once, unless you use it in the arena. And this is one that I should say is the only non-global damage buff that we'll be talking about in the video, as it only affects things at scale with a few specific stats. What it actually does though is raise your vigor, endurance, strength, and dexterity by 8 levels each, so a total of 32 levels of value, if you were to be using all those stats, at the cost of draining 4 health per second while active, which is basically a non-existent amount. To put it in perspective, it would take 200 seconds, more than 3 minutes, for that amount of health drain to be equivalent to a single fully upgraded Crimson Flask. Over the 90-second duration that the item actually has, it only does 360 damage, which is barely anything, honestly, in the late game. That said, the one existing copy of this item in the game comes from the first Jagged Peak Drake that is just unavoidable to find in the opening area in this little lake here, literally just past the Dragon Pit Terminus Site of Grace. That said, there is actually a craftable, weaker version of this item, which is Dragon Communion Flesh. The cookbook to make this craftable is right beside the Jagged Peak Mountainside Site of Grace right here. This is the path to get there from the start of this area in case you need it, but from the Grace itself, it is actually just a short walk around the cliff wall, past a few slimes, and then it'll be on this corpse on the cliff edge if you don't already have it. This version of the item then gives you 6 of each of the same stats, so it's still 24 levels of value. It's a little bit less, but it's still very good, and it damages you even less at only 3 HP lost per second, or 270 over the full duration of the buff, as it does also still last for 90 seconds. The thing is, farming this isn't exactly easy, but that many levels is a lot of value. Again, the main place that I can see people using this is Arena PvP, where consumables are refunded when you come back to the real world, but even then you'd probably rather just repeatedly use the single-use strong one for that. And the trick is that it would let you just take up to 32 levels out of any of the stats that it boosts in your current build if you wanted to be in a specifically PvP setup. It would let you apply those levels to other places while still being the same general level. And that's obviously especially insane with a quality type scaling build, as you would get full advantage of both the strength and dexterity that you would get together. Then past that, there is the Rakshasa armor set. This set comes from the boss located in the Eastern Nameless Mausoleum, which is found in the lower section of the Shadow Altus region. We have a video on how to reach each section of the map if you haven't been there before, but this is the specific location of the boss fight itself. From the Grace, just follow down the gravestones into the river, then hug the wall on your right, and after after a few seconds of riding, you should see the mausoleum popping up in the distance as you approach. The actual armor set then, inside itself, raises your damage by around 2% per armor piece equipped, for a total of 8% increased damage while wearing all of the pieces. This one does have a bit of a negative drawback though, which is that the damage negation stats are pretty poor for a set of its weight class. It specifically does weigh the same amount as the Knight's Cavalry set, and you can directly pretty much compare how worse defensively it is, but if you know how to build your defenses properly in this game anyways, and you have at least a reasonable Shadow-Tree Blessing level, you can easily overcome the negatives of this armor set relatively easily. That said, if you do so, it basically just ends up being a free 8% damage boost for any build that doesn't otherwise benefit from specific armor pieces being equipped, not just affecting weapons or anything like that, but magic as well, which is sort of ridiculous when you put it like that. Next up then is the Bloodsucking Crystal Tier, and this one is a pretty neat new addition to our collection of upgrades for the Wondrous Flask of Physic. Specifically, this raises all damage that you deal by 20% for 90 seconds, at the cost of draining around 1% of your health per second while active, which may sound like it's a lot, but if you stack enough damage buffs like this, you will be done most fights in the game before that even does enough damage to do more than a single flask's worth of damage to you, really. That said, as far as actually getting this one for yourself, it is the reward for killing a specific furnace golem enemy. To even begin this fight, you need to have at least one hefty furnace pot item. The cookbook to craft these is located just southeast of the Great Bridge North site of Grace in this little shack right here. Once you have that, you can head to the Castle Watering Hole site of Grace here out of the Illusion Wall pathway from the Shadow Keep. Again, if you need to know how to get to this area, we have a video on the channel already that you can check out. Once here, climb like so over the northern side of the ruins to reach this upper balcony area looking at this downed furnace golem. Grab your hefty furnace pot and throw it directly into its head basket. Goal! If you hit the right spot, it'll come to life, and then you can kill it for this specific tier upgrade at the end. Finally then, and this is the real big one today, a combination of a couple that work together quite well, the Madding Hand Fist Weapons and the Aged One's Exultation Talisman. Both of these items give you a buff for 30 seconds after madness is applied, either to you or to anyone near you, which means that you can proc this yourself quite easily before a boss fight. After testing each of these individually myself, Madding Hand gives you a 7.5% increase to your attack power, which stays on if you switch weapons, as you can see me testing on a two-handed giant crusher. To get this one for yourself, it is dropped by the Madding Hand named enemy NPC that spawns as you walk forward along the main path from the Woodland Trail side of Grace towards the Ruined Church. The Aged One's Exultation Talisman is a 20% boost to attack power, so it is a larger bonus, but you can of course use these together in tandem, especially as Madding Hand is relatively low weight, so you don't even need to be using it as a weapon to benefit from the buff it has. The talisman then is actually a sort of puzzle solution, essentially, that you get it from, as it is dropped by an enemy that you cannot normally damage. The specific enemy then is the little Madness Lantern Boy at this location on your map. For clarity, I'll just show the full path from the church ruins site of Grace in the Abyssal Woods. Once you reach the enemy, then the trick here is that you need to parry them. Once you've parried them and do the follow-up crit attack, they will be vulnerable to damage and you can just finish them off easily, with this specific one here dropping the talisman. That said, there are other buffs when madness is applied that these actually stack with as well, and they are all multiplicative buffs, so 7.5% from the Madding Hand being equipped, 20% from the talisman, and you can specifically apply madness to yourself using the Flame of Frenzy spell at only 17 faith, but if you hit 33 faith in your build, you can use Howl of Shabriri, which not only applies madness to yourself, but also gives you a damage buff of its own of 25% for 40 seconds, while making you, of course, take 30% more damage in return. Casting this 3 times in a row, though, charged, triggers madness unless your armor set has enough resistance that it takes 4, and you can just use this to actually activate all of our other buffs, which also includes the Black Dumpling Helmet from the base game for another 10% attack power that lasts for 60 seconds after the wearer specifically is inflicted with madness, which is why we inflict ourselves. themselves. Altogether, after your madness procs in the setup due to the buff stacking multiplicatively rather than additively, you actually gain 77.4% increased damage for the first 30 seconds. You can of course do this right in front of a boss door as well, drink one of each flask to recoup the losses afterwards, and you'd still have 28 seconds or so of a ridiculous damage increase left to take advantage of. After 30 seconds then, it drops down to a 37.5% damage increase, which is still a massive buff. 40 seconds post-madness, it drops to only a 10% buff though, which does last until the 1 minute mark. Still though, with that kind of damage boosting going on an otherwise just solid build, you really can't underestimate what a minute of rolling buffs like that can actually accomplish. Not to mention, you can of course stack this with the other things from today. You could use things like Rakshasa armor on top of this in your 3 non-dumpling slots, and using the Golden Vow consumable. Though honestly, if you have Howl of Shabriri, you might as well use the incantation version of Golden Vow, honestly, because you have the faith to do so, which makes it even better. Then you can stack that with the Bloodsucking crystal tier on top of all of it as well, and altogether it comes to just under a 160% increase over your base damage with none of these things applied. I cannot express just how big of a difference that is for a pile of buffs that can be applied to literally any damage type or any build in the game. This is more than 2.5 times the damage that you do without any of this stuff on, and for some builds you can get even more than that. I mean, let's say you're doing like a jump attack build. Suddenly you can change out of the 2% bonus from Rakshasa chest armor for a much bigger increase to specifically jump attacks. The point being, one of the easiest ways to make your experience easier in the Elden Ring DLC is to know how to increase your damage in enough ways that aren't at all build dependent, that you can make any build kill any boss. Things that you can do no matter what your actual playstyle is that will just make you stronger in general, and specifically these are all of the new ways of doing so in the DLC, how to get them, how applicable they actually are to the average player, and of course their actual numbers too, and how they function together. I hope this helps you all out then in the everlasting journey to make funky off-meta things good enough to kill the hardest bosses in the game, or even if you just need help getting past something that's giving you trouble in general. Sometimes the best way to deal with it is just to stick on a dumpling head, slip on a dead guy's hands, and scream to the world about nothing in particular. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.